Hello and welcome to Heroic Media. I'm Michelle Bauman.
And I'm Patrick Cordova.
This week on Heroic Media, the federal government conducts its first ever large-scale survey on the gay and bisexual population.
Christian pastors work to bring the truth about life to young women in China.
And Planned Parenthood comes under fire for the second time this month for questionable practices.
Stay tuned for all these stories and more here on Heroic Media. So here at Heroic Media, we explore news headlines that deal with a lot of very foundational moral issues, a lot of issues that revolve around family and marriage and life.
Absolutely, and those issues tend to focus on the topics of abortion, euthanasia, embryonic stem cell research, human cloning, and homosexual marriage.
Exactly.
So, Patrick, what's our first story for the day?
So in our first story, the first large-scale government survey has been completed, which measured the number of Americans and their sexual orientation. And the results showed that it is less than 3% of Americans that identify as being homosexual. So this was very interesting, first of all, because there's been a lot of surveys and things like that that have showed somewhere, there's a variance of course, but usually it's like around 4%-ish, between 3.5% to 5%, right around there. And so this survey was very interesting because it showed it was a very large survey. It was something like 34,000 people, and conducted by the government. It was the first of its kind, and it showed a smaller portion. So it was very interesting. I mean, obviously still that's a lot of people, that's millions of people, but it was very interesting to note that it was, I think one of the most interesting things was that it was a small percentage, because there's so much media coverage and so much attention and given to all these homosexual rights and things like this. So what was your take on this?
Well, the thing that I thought was most interesting is how it compared to people's perception of the percentage of gay and bisexual individuals. In 2011, Gallup conducted a poll that asked people, just your best guess, what percentage of the US population do you think is gay or lesbian? And the majority guessed that it was 20% or more of people. They think that more than 1 in 5 people identifies as homosexual. And in the reality is that 1.6% of adults self-identify as gay or lesbian, and then 0.7% consider themselves bisexual. So if you add that up, that's less than 3%. So more than 20%, less than 3%. There's a huge difference here, and I think that shows really the power of the media, and there's a lot of political power, a lot of money behind really pushing this group and normalizing this. And I think it's really important that we always have to find this balance, because we absolutely can't disregard people, no matter what percentage, no matter if they're a minority or a majority. These are human beings and they have human dignity.
Absolutely.
And there is absolutely discrimination, and there is hatred, and there is very real animosity towards these individuals. And we need to make sure that we always treat them with love and compassion and respect.
Absolutely.
But the Catholic Church, I think, is so right in separating the individual from the action. And so we can love an individual no matter what their desires or their sexual inclination, but we can also say that certain types of conduct and certain actions are morally wrong. Those two things coexist.
Yeah, we're part of a fallen race, right? The human race is fallen from Adam and Eve in the garden. We all have a tendency to sin. There's all kinds of different sins, whether homosexuality is something that you're born with or something that you develop, or something that's a cause of your environment, or whatever it is. It doesn't really matter. Having homosexual tendencies in and of themselves is not sinful, but acting out on those homosexual thoughts or whatever, that is what is sinful. So I think it's important also to remember that. And I'm really glad that you mentioned that no matter how small the percentage of the population is that we have to remember that these people have dignity and they deserve respect. Because I think sometimes people will get the idea that, oh, it's such a small percentage, why do we even care? But that's not what we're saying. But it is really interesting, I think, to note, like you said, the perception of this, that you think, TV shows and movies and on the radio and advertisements and billboards and everywhere, it's just kind of shoved down your throat, like, oh, this is the norm.
Yeah, it's normalized.
Right, and so 96.6% in this study showed heterosexual. So I think it's very it's just so contradictory to what you see and hear, and what's made, you're brought to the forefront and made important. And so this survey too was really looking for kind of the health of people as it relates to their sexuality. And so I thought it was interesting that there was, that the survey found that being homosexual showed an increased chance of smoking, an increased consumption of alcohol if you have 5 or more drinks a day in one or more times in a year, or more than one time in the last year. And if you've been tested for HIV, all of those things are increased. If you're homosexual, you will have done those things more than if you were not. So I find it interesting because this study was just trying to, these studies and surveys try to assess the health of the United States, and now they've started tying sexuality into that. So.
Right, and I think this is a groundbreaking study. It's really the first of its kind on such a large scale. So they'll have to delve into some of these things and say what the correlation, causation, what is going on here, what exactly is the nature of the relationship of these statistics. But it's something that they will that they'll certainly be considering. And and of course, overshadowing all of this is the marriage debate, and this is something that's being pushed all over the place.
Yes.
And just I think it's important to recognize that the Catholic Church is not picking on the gay people, which is just this image out there. Oh, they just hate the gays. They just hate the gays.
Right.
And it's just just as the church says that homosexual behavior is not acceptable, the church also says that any kind of sex outside of marriage is not okay. So even a man and a woman having sex outside of marriage is wrong.
Absolutely.
And it's not just that they're picking on the homosexuals, it's the sanctity of marriage as an institution of bringing together the two halves of humanity for the possibility of procreating children.
Yes.
And that is what's sacred, and that is what we're lifting up rather than trying to push anyone down.
Absolutely, and I'm really glad that you mentioned that, like just about the kind of how marriage has kind of dissolved and sexual promiscuity has become so prevalent, because I think this really is making it easier to pass homosexual rights legislation type stuff on homosexual marriage, because once you devalue marriage and devalue sex, I think it becomes easy to just be like, well, then it doesn't really matter. Anybody can do it. Who cares, right? Anybody can participate in these things. And so I think that that's a key component of this. And like you said too, the Catholic Church doesn't say homosexual. Doesn't. It's not that that the church hates homosexuals or anything like that. They love all, and the church wants those people to have salvation, and they know that the path that a lot of this mainstream view of homosexuality will lead them to a path not of heaven.
Right.
And so it has the interest of these folks in mind.
Right. Absolutely. Absolutely. In our next story, the pro-life movement is beginning to gain traction in China, which has the highest abortion numbers in the world. The high abortion rates are largely due to a government that both promotes and sometimes forces abortion on women.
Yeah, so China is pretty wild.
It is.
Like every time you hear stories, it's like.
Yeah, and just looking at I was just absolutely blown away by the numbers of abortion. It said that officially 13 million abortions per year, but that doesn't include some of the back alley abortions, and they think that the actual numbers could be as high as 30 million per year, which is just
insane.
It's absolutely phenomenal to think about 30 million human lives being extinguished every year just through abortion.
It's just insane, and that's not a statistic that you would want to have for your country, like leading abortions.
Yeah.
And like you said, I find it so fascinating that the numbers could be as high as like 30-something million, right? It's like, why the discrepancy? And it's apparently because the government doesn't really care about these back alley, so to speak, abortions, because in these clinics that are operating illegally, technically, under the government, according to government regulations, they're operating illegally. The government doesn't really care too much to go and try to shut these people down, because it will skew their numbers, right? Instead of having 13 million a year abortions, they're going to have 30-something million abortions if these were legal entities that were, operating under the statistics and everything. So I think that's pretty scary, and I think it's one of these ideas to kind of a notion that we have here in America that you have to have like this unrestricted access to abortion. It's this right, and really at the heart of it, they don't really care about the health of these women. And you can see, even if it's legal, like it is in China, that there still can be all these back alley abortions occurring, right? Even more so than they're reporting in actual clinics.
Right,
So.
and that's there's I just saw this story and there were so many different factors contributing to it. That was one of the really big aspects. And then also the fact that just culturally, they don't like to talk about any kind of sex ed, good or bad. And so you have parents who don't want to talk to their children about the dignity of sexuality. You have just nothing. And so these kids teachers don't teach. So they're being educated by Western movies and all the promiscuity going on there. And that is where they're getting their understanding of sexuality. And but at the same time, being pregnant outside of marriage is still very shameful. So you have this you have these young girls getting pregnant and the family shuns them. They can be kicked out of school. They can lose their job. They can lose everything. And so they're pressured by their families or by society to get abortions, and that's another factor here.
Right. I think it's just so interesting how some notions, like traditional notions, stay with society and some don't. Like I noticed you mentioned one of the reasons why, you know, all this is these abortion numbers is that this idea that it's looked down upon to be pregnant outside of wedlock, but it's not looked down upon now to have sex outside of wedlock, right? It's really interesting.
Not a good combination.
Yeah, it's not a good combination, and I think that you know, the devil has really made it that way so that he could do the most damage, right? And the damage, of course, is against children, you know, and this doesn't just obviously kill a living human person, but it also damages these women, you know, emotionally, physically. They're going to be scarred.
Absolutely, and then to add to this, you have the one-child policy where for many women, they're not allowed to have a second child. And if they get pregnant, the government, there are forced abortions where, I mean, I've read accounts, I've heard testimony before Congress where they would drag a woman in, kicking and screaming, and perform an abortion and then a sterilization on her. And that is incredibly scarring, and there are human rights groups trying to raise awareness about this.
It's horrible.
But the other thing, you know, it's just, you look at some of these Christian leaders who didn't ever preach about it, didn't ever talk about it. Maybe they assisted in abortions because they literally didn't know. And they said that their knowledge of fetal development, they just keep it from the people. They don't want them to know. And so you have these people who are going out and now it's just now coming to them, and you have these women who are just sobbing, and it's so sad. One quote, the woman said, "Lord, forgive me for aborting my child. I didn't know it was murder." And so just they're shocked and they're finding out, and now they're really setting up. They have helplines that women can call and try to get help. They'll offer them a safe haven from their families, from the government, various things. So it's good that we're seeing some of these resources, but it's just crazy the situation there.
And I'm glad you pointed that out, because education has a whole lot to do with this, right? If you're just taught, or that you think that it's just a clump of cells, or it's just nothing, you know, it's just a byproduct of this procedure or whatever, of course you're not going to have any moral objections to it. You don't know that it's a bad thing. And so you're talking about like these preachers that have gone out in you know, to these churches and have taught the truth about life and the sanctity of human beings and what a baby actually is, and that there is a human being at all stages of development. And like you said, these accounts of these women just breaking down like, oh my gosh, I can't believe I did that. I never would have done it. You know, people are really having this strong conversion of heart. And I think that we have to remember that. Jesus always told us, you know, that we need to preach the gospel and we need to spread the good news. And for whatever reason, it's sometimes it can be difficult on these subjects. They're difficult subjects, let's face it, right? So, but it's amazing to see when you give people the opportunity to know the truth and come to the truth, that you can really change hearts.
Absolutely.
And so I think that that's key to converting, you know, changing the hearts and minds of people, especially in these countries where, like China, where it's just, I think I heard somebody say that something like abortion is as prevalent as water.
Yeah,
it's just as common day.
Drinking water.
Yeah, it's common as drinking water.
That was shocking.
It's like, oh my gosh, it's like, that's just insane. And when it becomes like that, I think society and people just get desensitized, you know?
Yeah, it said that for many people, they view it as a method of birth control because they don't even realize that this is a baby. Then it's just, okay, you get pregnant and you go in. Some women who had 5 or more abortions, and it's literally just, okay, well, you get pregnant, that's what happens. They're using it as a method of birth control. There's no effort taken to avoid it in the future. It's like, oh, you just routinely go in and this is something that happens. So the whole mindset, and you know, you can see all these different factors from the government to the culture, all these things are combining, and really that's what it's going to take to solve it. You know, there has to be a cultural awareness, and there also has to be conversion of heart, and then eventually the government has to stop with some of these policies that are just forcing women to go and kill their babies.
Exactly, and I think that's the key, right? You have to have this conversion, and I know one organization, a pro-life organization, China Life Alliance, rather, CLA. They've been doing a lot of work and have realized that few churches in China have even heard about the Bible and like what the Bible teaches on these subjects. Mm-hmm. So I think we really just need to spread the word over there and convert hearts.
Absolutely, certainly.
All right.
Coming up after the break, we will talk to the founder of a life-affirming women's health clinic about their approach to women's health care.
Stay tuned. Hello and welcome back to Heroic Media. For this segment, we have a special guest joining us, Abby Sinnott, the co-founder of Bella Natural Women's Healthcare here in Denver, Colorado. Abby, thanks so much for joining us.
Thanks for having me.
And we're here today to discuss a recent story out of Planned Parenthood, which is drawing renewed criticism after undercover videos showed employees at several clinics encouraging teens to experiment with violent sex. This comes just a week after accusations that Planned Parenthood had covered up child rape. So in the midst of all of these things that are going on, Abby, you are working to help start Bella, this clinic that's going to offer a natural alternative approach to women's care. Can you tell us a little bit about that approach and what's at the heart of it?
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks. The main thing about Bella is that when it comes down to it, women are beautiful. Women are strong and they're unique and they're amazing. And in that, we deserve good care. We deserve awesome care that understands who we were, who we are made, who we are, and that all aspects of our life impact who we are. Yeah. And healthcare in general needs to take into consideration our minds, our bodies, our hearts, and our souls.
Right, absolutely.
And that's what Bella's about.
Yeah, exactly. That's like the focus, right? This is kind of natural approach and a whole, like kind of a holistic approach almost.
Absolutely.
That incorporates the human person as it is. How do you think that approach will, I think that once the clinic opens, that it will bring not just people of faith, but it can have also a natural attraction for other people due to that aspect.
Yeah, absolutely. I think all women want to know that they're being cared for, that at the heart of what's going on around them, in moments that they'll never forget, the birth of their child, or in their struggles with infertility, or with weirdness in their menstrual cycle, they want to know that they're okay, that it's normal, and that it's going to be taken care of. Mm-hmm. And so whether you're Catholic or whether you're non-denominational or whether you don't believe in anything, I think you want to know that you're being taken care of. And so many people in Denver, especially right now, are after organic beefs or non-hormone whatever, and are looking for options that offer a more natural approach, whether it's natural family planning or a natural delivery or natural methods to go into their menopause. We want to get to really, really good scientific care that's the best approach for their whatever state they're in.
And Abby, the name of the clinic is Bella. Where did you get the name for that?
Yeah, so it's kind of like naming a child when you're naming a clinic, I think. And Bella, it kind of came to us as we were just trying to pray and get to God's clinic, I think, ultimately. Yeah. And so Bella in Italian means beautiful. We hear about that all the time, beautiful, Bella, beautiful or Italian or Latin. Actually, surprisingly, is wars. So when you're talking about women and we're talking about how beautiful they are, Bella's only appropriate for the beautiful nature. But when we're talking about what's going on in our culture right now, wars, surprisingly, God revealed to us, I think, that this is a beautiful war on the healthcare and on women right now. Yeah. And so that's what it's about.
It seems like that's always in the headlines now, it's like, the war on women, right?
Exactly.
And so this is really nice, I think, because it's kind of like the opposite view of what that war on women is and how you can kind of contrast it and really build women up and treat women with respect and dignity.
Exactly. You're exactly right. From the very heart of how, our conception, we were made perfectly. We were made beautifully, and there's nothing wrong with that. There may be, imperfections here or there, problems with the cycle, or problems, getting pregnant, like I said, but ultimately we're perfect. We may need to figure it out, but we're okay.
Yeah.
And so really embracing that and being okay with that and figuring it out through that. Our goal at Bella is to embrace the dignity of women. We want to do this through a natural and a healing approach. And then also we want to embrace that, like I said, with cooperation with life as well.
Right.
And that's really what it comes down to at Bella.
So how's this journey been for you guys? Like, starting, I know like starting up a business is really difficult. There's a lot involved.
Yeah.
How is it that you were able to find the type of staff that you needed to be able to promote this type of culture and this type, what was your image, basically, what you're looking for?
Yeah, so I think that God has picked each one of us, handpicked us, and prepared us for this journey. So myself, my mom, actually, we're working together. We're both nurse practitioners.
Excellent.
Our doctor is a doctor, Dr. Steve Hickner. He's been a doctor for 22 years, has extensive experience in obstetrics and gynecology, and recently is finishing up his training at the Pope Paul VI Institute in NAPRO technology, and will be a NAPRO trained surgeon as well. So he's very well experienced. We also have a Creighton fertility care nurse. So she's a bachelor prepared nurse, but also trained in fertility care from Creighton, or for the Pope Paul VI Institute. And then we will be having a midwife joining our staff, and a couple of just extra office administrative people.
Sure.
Yeah.
Can you just explain a little bit, you mentioned NAPRO and Creighton, can you explain a little bit about what that approach is and how it's a natural Catholic approach to fertility?
Yeah, so Dr. Tom Hilgers out of the Pope Paul VI Institute, he's been working for years and years, since the 1970s, to create more of a natural science that embraces natural family planning, but also gets to the root cause. So instead of covering up things like mainstream medicine often does with a birth control pill, this is looking at the actual hormones, looking at the actual pathology in the women's cycle, and figuring out what's actually going on and fixing the problem, as opposed to just masking the problem.
Right, with drugs, right? That's
Exactly.
what we always seem to want, like some magical pill or some shot or something that fixes our problems.
Right.
But a lot of times it's that kind of holistic type of approach that really fixes the problem itself instead of masking it.
Right, and not to say we're not going to use medicine or we're not going to use surgery, because sometimes you need to do that.
Yes.
But ultimately, it's doing what's best for the woman as opposed to masking anything else.
Absolutely, that makes a lot of sense.
That's great. I think you really summed it up when you said a beautiful war for respect and dignity in women's healthcare, because so often what we see out there is we see women being pressured into abortion, sterilization. We had a woman on the show a while ago who was pressured into being sterilized after she had several children.
Right.
So I think just that idea of dignity and respect and putting that back in to women's healthcare is so key and so great. So I think it's wonderful what you're doing.
Thank you.
Thank you so much for joining us. We really appreciate
Absolutely.
your insight on all this, and thank you for sharing your story, and we really look forward to the clinic opening. So.
Thanks. Thanks for having me.
We'll have one more story after we come back, so stay tuned.
Welcome back to Heroic Media. In our final story, a leading euthanasia activist in Belgium has caused a stir after offering tours of Auschwitz and labeling the tours as inspiring. So my reaction to this was like, what? Like, this is for real? So, I mean, I just don't get this.
It was really odd, and sometimes, when you see articles about these type of thing, they're taking it out of context, and then you go and look and you understand. In this case, you look at what he actually said, and then he sort of tried to cover it up, and it just doesn't even make sense. It's not, it wasn't taken out of context. He's like, oh, well, this isn't going to be about euthanasia, it's about other things, and euthanasia is just going to be mentioned, but Auschwitz is inspiring. And it's really bizarre and really weird, and people are responding to this saying, oh, this is preposterous, this is obscene, this is shocking.
Yeah.
And I think it is.
It is obscene, it is shocking, it's offensive. Right? Why would you call these facilities in Auschwitz that just did such unfathomable harm and destruction to human life, innocent men, women, and children, how could you call that inspiring? Like, why would you go take a tour and just be like, oh, this is so inspiring, right? I mean, it should be saddening and disgusting.
It's sick, yeah.
Like, I don't understand how it could be inspiring, but I suppose, from somebody who promotes euthanasia, and he's a very well-known euthanasia administrator, I guess is what you'd call him. He's very, you got to think, like, in his mind, he's a little twisted on subjects relating to death. And so, I mean, this guy has so many stories about some of the people that he's, helped to kill, basically, but he's helped them. That's how it's viewed, right? And that's how it's justified. And I think it really ties into a lot of different problems that we're having these days. It ties into relativism, especially, right? If you want it, then it's okay for you. But why is it not okay? Well, you tell me.
Well,
why do you think it's not okay?
The idea that life has value and that it doesn't matter whether you're sick or whether you're hurt, that human life, we're created in the image and likeness of God, and our lives have intrinsic dignity and value and worth.
Absolutely.
And just on a more practical level, what message is that sending out if one person who is sick says, I choose to be euthanized because my life doesn't have value? What is that sending out to? What message does that send to all the other sick people? And if you look at some of the people that this man has helped kill, there was a pair of twins who were going blind. There was a patient who had undergone a botched sex change operation. And this one I just thought was awful, an anorexic woman who was suffering the scars of previous sexual abuse. And so instead of supporting these people and saying, let us help you, your life isn't worth living because of what you've gone through, let's kill you.
Exactly.
That is just the worst, most sick possible thing. And I don't know the guy, and I know that a lot of times the desire for euthanasia is really motivated by a very twisted sense of compassion. So, we can give him the benefit of the doubt and say maybe that's what he's doing here, but it's very misguided, and that then you get statements like a concentration camp being inspiring.
Yeah, absolutely. I couldn't agree more. I think you said that very well. And one of the things, too, from a Christian perspective, I think we have to remember is that Jesus told us that, if we don't take up our cross and bear it, if we don't suffer, that we cannot have salvation. We need to unite, suffer with Christ in order to have salvation. And so I think that's a key component, especially in today's world where we just don't want have anything to do with suffering or pain or anything. You just die, right? And so it kind of robs that person of the opportunity to be able to unite themselves to Christ, right?
That's a really good point.
I mean, and sure, maybe these people aren't Christian at that point in time, but really, there's plenty of miracles that have happened where people that you don't think are going to have a conversion. So I think taking, from a Christian perspective, that's one of the biggest things for me too, is you're just taking this opportunity away from them, devaluing human life.
Absolutely, that's devaluing human life, and this is where all these issues are connected. And we see, when we say, oh, your life is not worth anything if you are sick, your life is not worth anything if you are unborn, your life is not worth anything if, various different things. And it's all on a scale. We're seeing, all of these issues are connected, and I think this is where we really see it. There is a slippery slope there. And if you can say, oh, this sick person doesn't deserve to live, why not go out and proactively kill all those sick people? Even they might want to live, but they're draining resources, that type of thing. So there are far-reaching implications to this kind of mindset.
Absolutely, couldn't agree more. They're all tied together, and they're very far-reaching implications.
Absolutely.
All right, that's it for this week on Heroic Media. Please join us next week for all the up-to-date news on the pro-life issues that matter to you.
Please feel free to write to us with any comments, questions, or news tips at news@heroicmedia.org.
And please visit our website at heroicmedianews.org, where you can check out more stories like the ones we discussed tonight.
That's it for today. Until next time, keep us in your prayers.
God bless.